This episode is brought to you by the Arvada Center, because their first play of the year is a biting dark comedy exploring the complexities of gentrification in our communities. Clybourne Park plays February 14th to March 30th in the Arvada Center's Black Box Theater. It was written as both an unofficial sequel and response to Lorraine Hansberry's famous A Raisin in the Sun. I mean, this play won a Pulitzer, people. It's a razor-sharp satire about the politics of housing, race, and gentrification. Tickets are available now at arvadacenter.org. That's arvadacenter.org.
Today on CityCast Denver, local restaurants are in crisis. But depending on who you ask, it's unclear what the problem is. Diners are sick of paying $20 for a mediocre cheeseburger. But restaurateurs are talking about how many spots have closed. More than 1 in 5 since 2021, according to data from the Department of Excise and License. So what's to be done? One of the city's most successful restaurateurs, Juan Padro, joins me today with the Democratic policy analyst Scott Wasserman to talk about the crazy idea they've cooked up that they think will fix the problem as they see it. And watch out, this one has some explicit moments. Today is Wednesday, February 5th. I'm Paul Caroli, and here's what Denver's talking about. Juan Padro and Scott Wasserman, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Great to be here.
So Juan, I really want to start with you because your company, Culinary Creative Group, owns more than a dozen local restaurants and bars, some of the best in the city, I would say. You opened at least 2 last year by my count. And I want to understand, people talk about this crisis in the restaurant industry. What has this meant for your bottom line?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. Restaurants are complicated businesses, I think, as everybody knows. We get into this business because we love it. We love people, we love our community, we love, we're sort of an activist business, to be honest with you, like generally. And so, it's about, food and wine, yes, but it's about, sustainability, and it's about employing people from disadvantaged communities, and it's about, giving people a job to pay their way through college, and, or single mom, who needs flexibility in her schedule. And, how it's evolved over the last 15, 20 years, really, kind of the Food Network kind of helped with this stuff, but it's actually become a viable career because people are making money, and they can make good money. They can buy a home. They can take care of their children. They can send their kids to college. When you see a chef out there, it's exciting to see them cook. You see a mixologist or cocktail, bartenders have become local celebrities. Yeah,
they're stars. It's fun. Yeah, the hype is fun.
It's fun. And it's opened up a lot of opportunities for them in different areas as well. So, we're in a situation where in Denver, Colorado, we've got a challenging economic environment. The biggest challenge is labor, and the cost of labor. And I think that, that's something that's really affecting everybody's bottom line big time.
Okay, I think that's a good segue over to you, Scott, because I know you as an expert on tax law. You were the president of the Bell Policy Center. You help Democrats craft strategies to work around Tabor. Why did you want to get involved with Juan to work on this labor cost issue?
So for the last 8 years prior to what I'm doing right now, I was president of a group called the Bell Policy Center, worked on not just tax policy, but economic mobility policy overall. And, minimum wage has always been a really important issue for the Bell, and it continues to be a really important issue for me. After I left the Bell Policy Center, I started networking, talking to a few folks, and one issue kept coming up, which was this tip offset issue in Denver. And I have to admit that I'd heard about it, had very little sympathy for it at the time. The focus was raising minimum wage when I was at the Bell.
Right, because you're a Democrat. This is a liberal city. This is how people think. Raising the minimum wage, you just take that for granted. That's a good thing.
Right. And I think that as I started to hear the stories, something wasn't adding up. I was like, well, wait a minute. You guys are paying over minimum wage, right? So why do you care what this tip offset issue, which we're going to talk about today, what it's requiring you to do? And the more I started to listen to it, I started to realize, this isn't about minimum wage. This isn't about wage standards. This is about the percentage of the total after tip compensation that a guy like Juan is being required to pay. And the more I understood it, and the more I heard the impact that this was having on restaurants, particularly in Denver, the more I realized that, wait a minute, if we've passed this slew of progressive policies over the last 10 years, most of which I think are great. Mm-hmm. But if we don't fix them where there are flaws, then that's going to be a big problem for us, because what that means is that people are going to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And as we'll talk about, I would like to see the minimum wage go up in communities around the state of Colorado. I think the challenge that we will face is that if we don't fix the flaw that exists in the law, then I think you're going to see progressive people. And I have to say, like, Juan's a pretty progressive guy. We're going to see those folks opposing increase the minimum wage because they're going to say, you have not fixed this issue for restaurants.
All right, Scott, actually, let's get into the details a little bit. Can you give us the backstory of how we got to this place here in Denver and in Colorado?
First of all, I'll just say this involves two of people's favorite things, right? Math and the law. Okay, because in 2016, the voters in Colorado approved automatic inflationary increases to the statewide minimum wage. Okay, and in that constitutional language, there is a fixed number, $3.02. And it says that employers of tipped employees can only reduce the amount they pay to tipped workers by $3.02. Now, this is the math part. All right. And I'm not really a math guy. I just play one on the radio. But but what happens is you have an inflating minimum wage, okay, that's going up and up and up, as I would argue it should. And then you have this fixed number. So $3.02 less than that bigger number is going to keep creating a bigger and bigger percentage that restaurateurs are paying toward an increasing minimum wage. So already we have an issue at the state level. You've got this fixed number up against an increasing minimum wage. Now, in 2019, the legislature passed a law and said, local governments, you can set a minimum wage higher than the state minimum wage. Great. They took that $3.02 from the Constitution and they kept that in the state law. And so when Denver city councilors met and said, well, what should we set our higher minimum wage to? They had absolutely no flexibility to say, well, we're going to offset it more because the minimum wage is so much more. And the result is that when this whole project started in Denver, you had restaurateurs paying around 78% of the minimum wage. Today, it's 85% of the minimum wage that they have to cover. Now, bear in mind, you have tip wage employees who are making $37 an hour after tips. So this whole conversation is not about the minimum wage, right? By law, you cannot pay someone. If they don't get enough, if it's a slow night, they don't get tips, they cannot be paid below minimum wage. So this is all about a percentage, right? And whether or not we can give these local governments flexibility to increase their offset, right? And ease the pressure, right? And so that's what this is about.
Okay. Well, Juan, what has this meant for your restaurant?
Man, this guy, he's tough to follow, isn't he?
I mean, it's very complicated. I think that's why people struggle with it, is because the minimum wage is easy to understand.
But this is not a minimum wage conversation. So I think we need to be very clear about that. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any restaurateur that would argue that, our $18 an hour is a livable wage, right? That's bullshit, right? We know that.
Yeah, I think right? MIT's living wage calculator says you need to make about $25.62 per hour to live in Denver County. That's a livable wage.
Okay, right. My dishwashers today start at $24. It's not necessarily a job you should be able to take care of your family with, but as a stepping stone to get into a restaurant, if you have no experience, you're going to be past that in 6 months. Okay. So the idea here is we're talking about a class of worker that is making anywhere, I can comment on my category of restaurant, which would be casual, polished casual, and high end. So think of your, burger and beer joints, like sports bar category. Then the polished casual category would be defined as a $50 a head plate or so, and then the high end is $75+ a head, right? Those people are making, on the very low end, $35 an hour and up to $60 an hour. Okay, so we're not talking about minimum wage. Okay, we're talking about really good wages. and really good jobs. And I want to be very clear that the restaurant community wants to be part of the solution. We're not trying to like fight minimum wage. We're trying to be part of a solution for a city. We employ a lot of people. We can help with affordable housing because we have good wages, right? We can help with homelessness and formerly incarcerated and environmental and sustainability issues. We touch all those issues. We'll walk hand in hand with most progressives on those issues, right? So this is literally just, a small factor that is causing a huge problem in our industry to the point where it is. What's the number of restaurants that closed last year?
Well, so in Denver, between June of 2023 and June of 2024, we've seen 150 restaurants close. Today, we're seeing that I saw in this recent article, 22% drop in
applications in Denver
for restaurants.
So, hospitality is about one in every restaurants are about 1 in every 10 jobs in Colorado. Hospitality is about 1 in every 5. So what touches hospitality? So there's a ripple effect there. It's 20% of the workforce we're affecting. Right. Those numbers, do the math. What is that? 18, 20,000 jobs that we've lost.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
I want to take us back to Scott's realm and the politics because the governor seems to see this problem the same way you all do. It was kind of a surprise to me, at least, that he actually mentioned this whole thing in his State of the State speech this year. But he didn't have any ideas. He said it's time to address the way local minimum wage and tipped wage credit works to ensure restaurants, so important to the fabric of our communities, can thrive across our state and all workers, including those in the front and back of house, can earn a good wage. So he knows it's important. He wants ideas. What's the idea, folks?
I don't want to speak for the governor, but I can tell you that, he has always sort of said, hey, figure it out on the local level. You know, the state has not been overly intrusive to local municipalities in any, on really any issues, so that's been a thing. He knows, though, what the solutions are.
Yeah.
Do you two know? What's the idea?
I think at this point, we do. So first of all, as I said, there's a flaw in the law. The most important thing that we do is we have got to fix that flaw. We've got to take that fixed number out of the state law that authorizes local districts to set their minimum wage, and they need to be able to have the flexibility to increase the tipped offset.
Okay, so specifically what that would mean is you're saying the $3 differential between the tip minimum wage and the regular minimum wage at the state level, if you take away that requirement that it stays at $3, that would allow municipalities to, you're saying, lower the tipped minimum wage. Is
Correct.
That the suggestion?
No. This is not a minimum wage.
Well, so right. So I think and this is where we have to get wonky, right? Because there is, technically speaking, no such thing. And if you read federal labor law and you look at the way they talk about this, no such thing as a tipped minimum wage. What there is the minimum wage minus the offset credit.
Okay.
All right. And so what I think restaurants are looking for is an increase to that offset, right? Which lowers the effective base wage. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you can't discount the tips. Again, if somebody's making $27, $30 an hour in after tip wages, right? I think it's a reasonable argument to say, well, why do you need me to get to $18.81 as a component of that? But here's the thing. is we can't just say local districts, you have flexibility here. These guys are getting slaughtered right now. They need relief. And so what's really important is that we're talking about increasing the tipped offset, right? So, I mean, I think that's what we've got to do at the local level. At the state level, barring a constitutional change, I think the state could be looking at tax credits, other things to incentivize good actors. But, on another show, perhaps we could talk about the state's fiscal situation. That's really not in the cards this year. So that is the best way, right, to create the regulatory and legal environment to let these folks do what they do, which is pay good wages to their front of the house and their back of the house.
So you're saying increase this tipped credit, allow that tipped credit to grow, which would mean that the base pay for these tipped workers would be lower. Now, I understand you all think that they would still be making plenty of money with their tips, but I have to say, I've been talking to people, I've been talking to servers, bartenders. They know that when the base pay goes down, the tips don't go up, that this is less money for people.
So here is 2023 to 2024 in one of my taco joints. 2023, we did not take the tip credit. We were just straight minimum wage in service charge in my company. Here are the 6 servers that are still with us from that particular taco store. So 2023, $37.42 an hour with the $3 tip offset dropped to $36.38. $36.36 an hour went up to $36.93 an hour, an increase of 1.6. $35.16 an hour went up to $36.12, an increase of 2.7%.
So
$31.20 went up to $37.06, an 18.8% increase. So that's not true.
So these servers, when you stopped paying the $18.81 and you started using that $3 tip credit, they made more money?
Yes, because there are other factors. This is not a black and white conversation.
Interesting. I
right?
mean, that's fascinating.
So here are the factors, right? First of all, I'll ask you, when's the last time you've been in a restaurant and seen a busser?
We talked about this. I haven't seen one in a restaurant in Denver for a long time, but I know that they're at the airport.
Right.
I know that some of the restaurants that are the big money restaurants, they have
different.
bussers. Yeah.
Those are big guys.
Yeah.
Look, we've eliminated categories in restaurants, right? We've reduced staff, right? So we've had to eliminate jobs, right? People have bigger sections. They can make a little bit more money there. So you're not tipping out as much. So it's not a dollar for dollar thing. You're not saying I'm going to give somebody a $3 cut in pay. That's just not true.
Okay, well, here's something else we got to talk about, because it seems like the problem that we're talking, to isolate the problem, that's restaurants are closing. Restaurants are in crisis. But it's capitalism at some point. Markets have ebbs and flows. I looked back at the past, and there's a precedent for this. In 2007, when Colorado departed from the federal minimum wage, the tipped minimum wage here in Colorado, it nearly doubled. And restaurants were furious about that at the time. And yet what happened 3 years later? A young entrepreneur named Juan Padro opens Highland Tap and Burger, and a new restaurant empire is born.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to use the capitalism argument, then why are we talking about wages at all? I mean, if it's a competitive market and everybody's at zero, if the guy that pays the most is going to have the best people, right?
Well, hey now. So, here's what I would say, right? Okay, so we have minimum wage laws, okay, because we're not in dog-eat-dog capitalism.
It's not just capitalism is my point.
Right. So we operate in a world in which we have capitalism, okay, but then we say we have standards. We have a minimum wage standard, okay? And I think what's challenging in this debate, and let's say for argument's sake, and I think I agree with Juan, it's not a one-to-one thing. Let's say for argument's sake, somebody's hourly after tip compensation goes from $37 to $34 an hour, okay? We are at twice the minimum wage. We are talking about a minimum wage law. And I think the challenge here is you can't have it both ways. Now, if you want to have a living wage law, let's talk about a living wage law, right? But that's not what we have. What we have is basic minimum standards. And I think the reason why a young entrepreneur like Juan Padro opens up a restaurant is he is confident and knows that his compensation is well above minimum wage. So I think what's very challenging.
It wasn't for the first couple of years. I took zero salary for 2.5 years.
Well, that was your salary. You don't have a minimum.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess I hear you, and I think that's totally legitimate for people to say by changing the base, you are changing my compensation. But I think the issue here is what are we arguing about at the state capitol? What are we arguing about at city council? We're arguing about the minimum wage. And if you can guarantee that employees are making far above minimum wage, then what exactly are we arguing about here?
And I think you could get I don't want to speak for every restaurateur, but the ones that I know, I am certain I can say would guarantee 20% plus over the city minimum wage.
Well, I think what we're arguing about is the people that don't work at your taco shops, the people that don't get that $34, $37 per hour, because not every restaurant has that much success where they can get that kind of rate. And a lot of people do have times where they're making the minimum wage, and it will affect those people.
I don't want to say none, but I think you'd have to show me a tipped employee that makes minimum wage.
Well, that's a call out to the listeners. You know, if this is you, if this is something that you are worried about, we want to hear about it, because this is a real conversation. The governor wants to have it. The mayor wants to have it right now. This is a real change that could happen, and I know it's scary. Yeah. You know, the idea of changing the minimum wage laws is scary, and it's challenging. And so let us know what you think. Call in 720-500-5418. Tell us what you think. I have one last question for you, Juan Padro, because I think I just want to make this real for diners a little bit again, because when we talk about the restaurant crisis in Denver, I think a lot of people think my part of it as just someone going out to eat is I feel like I'm not getting value at Denver restaurants anymore. I feel like I'm paying $20 for a mediocre cheeseburger and I'm sick of it. Yeah. How does your proposal change that?
Yeah. So the cost of food is definitely higher in Colorado than it is on the coast, generally speaking. So it's amazing. You know, you bring up a good point. I was in New York over Thanksgiving week, and I went to one of the hot new restaurants in Soho. It's called C, stands for Southeast Asia. And I met a friend of mine who used to live in Denver, and we had 2 bottles of wine, and we did it was like one of those sharing plate type, restaurants. And my bill was $235, but we had 2 bottles of wine, and we had probably 3/4 of the menu, right? In Denver, that's $400. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. So there's a couple things, right? The tip offset would help that a lot. And the reason, and let me give you a number. I'll give you one number that I think will help you understand this. In the average restaurant in Denver, they do about 2.5 to 2.8 million. Average independently owned restaurant. Mm-hmm. It's about 60 seats. Okay. In decent times, we're talking about a 3 to 5% profit margin. So let's say 5%, $2.5 million. What's that? $125,000 a year in profit. Is that the math? Right. Every dollar increase in the tipped base wipes out about $50,000 in profit a year. We've just done that 4 years in a row. Those are astonishing numbers.
Well, it sounds like you two have some negotiations, some conversations to have with some state lawmakers and some city council members and the mayor and the governor. Are you optimistic?
I mean, here's what I would say. I think I am optimistic because and I in my previous life and I helped to lead a labor union in the past as well. Oftentimes we would hear from the business sector, if you pass this law, the sky's going to fall. And I think that most times we'd roll our eyes, legislators would roll their eyes year in, year out. We're in a situation now where the sky literally is falling. I think it's very difficult to look at the numbers that we're seeing and also to see that Denver and Boulder, of states that have a tip offset, Denver and Boulder have the highest effective tip minimum wage in the country. Okay.
Which means in the world.
Which means in the world. So I guess as a policy person and as a progressive, I have to acknowledge that it's not a coincidence, that there is a correlation between that and the fact that we've seen 150 restaurants close. And so I think the question is we have a problem. How do we fix it? I think if this can be a conversation about who we're really concerned about, right? And what the upper limits are for these restaurants and the different categories, I think we can solve this session. If this becomes an ideological battle, if this becomes a rhetorical battle about the minimum wage and people don't understand the nuances that we're talking about here, it will very quickly devolve into a very toxic business versus labor battle. And I think that would be very unfortunate. And so I'm very optimistic because I think the data is telling us what needs to happen. And I think we can rest assured that at the end of the day, we're talking about pretty good compensation for a very important sector of the economy.
And look, you're talking about an industry that by and large, not everybody, but by and large is very progressive in thought, right? Restaurants are always forward thinking. Restaurants are always politically, on the liberal side, mostly. At least so. Not all, but like I said.
I don't know, but
well, and I think this is...
What are you talking about?
That's a sweeping generalization of a whole industry. Who knows how these people feel? I don't know if that needs to be what it's about.
Well, it should be partly about that because, we're not so far off in ideological thought. We should be able to sit down and around a table and figure this out. My father was the president of the Farm Workers Union. My mother was in the Teachers Union. I come from Worcester, Massachusetts. I grew up with fucking nothing, right? And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back for that. But when I opened Highland Tap and Burger, my parents sat me down and they said, look at the neighborhood you're in. My dad's from Puerto Rico. Look at the people walking up and down the street. They got brown skin. Make sure they still have a home in 10 years.
Well, Juan Ponder, I think that's a perfect note to end on. I really appreciate you two sitting down and hashing this out with me. This is a complicated topic. And like I said, listeners, we do want to hear from you. And you two, I'll be watching your work closely this session. I hope we can keep in touch on this. It's so interesting to me. 720-500-5418 is the number to call if you have thoughts or opinions about this whole restaurant crisis, minimum wage, complicated situation. And we want to hear them. Again, 720-500-5418. Juan, Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell someone who makes the tipped minimum wage about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. If you love the show, come see us in person at Heyday. It's an indoor fair with a distinctly Denver twist on Saturday, March 8th. Get your tickets now at heydaydenver.com. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then. I went to this restaurant a few days ago. They only had one vegetarian option on the menu, and I ordered it, and they were like, "We don't have it." So I was like, "What can you do?" And they were like, the chefs made a pasta. And they brought out this pasta that was like egg noodles and zucchini and red peppers. And it was like, you're just clearing the fridge. This is bullshit. It's horrible. $27.